In the electrifying atmosphere of the morning Joe set, where the bright lights cast long shadows and the hum of anticipation filled the air like a brewing storm, Senator John Kennedy stepped into the fray, his folksy southern drawl ready to slice through the tension as he faced off against the host's barrage of pointed questions about what ICE agents out in the field truly consider a criminal. Is it just folks who've robbed a store or committed some heinous act? Or does it extend to everyday people? Like that father of 3 Marines who was just trimming bushes at an IHOP before being swept up off the street. Kennedy, with his signature blend of sharp intellect and down-home charm, didn't miss a beat, leaning forward in his chair as if he were chatting over sweet tea on a Louisiana porch. But his eyes sparkled with the fire of conviction as he began to dismantle the narrative piece by piece, insisting that he didn't know every nitty-gritty detail of that particular case without the file right in front of him. But let's get one thing straight. If someone's in the country illegally, that's a violation of the law. Plain and simple, and ICE isn't out there playing games. They're targeting public safety threats, the kind of dangerous individuals who make our streets less safe for hard-working families. He chuckled lightly, that wry Kennedy humor bubbling up as he quipped, "Look, if we're talking about fear in the community, how about the fear from criminals roaming free? Because some folks want to tie ICE's hands," and then he dove right into the facts, painting a vivid picture of recent arrests in Boston that had everyone in the studio, and surely the viewers at home sitting up a little straighter, like the case of Victor Gomez. Paris, a 33-year-old from Guatemala, who'd been charged with aggravated rape assault and battery with a dangerous weapon and indecent assault on a victim 14 or younger, a real monster that ICE had yanked off the streets before he could do more harm, making the point that these operations aren't random witch hunts, but precise strikes based on solid intel and criminal histories that can't be ignored if we care about protecting innocent lives. Kennedy pressed on his voice, steady and authoritative, drawing from his deep well of experience in public service, to explain that just the other day, IE had nabbed Kay Espinosa, another 33-year-old from Colombia, accused of aggravated assault on a pregnant victim. And if local leaders like Governor Healy and Mayor Wu were so worked up about an ICE vehicle parked legally on a public street, near a church, mind you, not conducting some raid inside the sanctuary, but just waiting to respond to a criminal alien's release, then maybe they ought to pick up the phone and thank those agents for making their city a tad safer, instead of stirring up unfounded panic that only helps the bad guys slip through the cracks. He wasn't about to let the conversation veer into emotional territory without grounding it in reality, repeatedly emphasizing that every case is different, and without the full background, the criminal history, the final deportation order, the investigative file built by dedicated ICE agents, he couldn't make snap judgments. But what he could say with absolute certainty was that being in the country illegally isn't something to brush off like a minor traffic ticket. It's a foundational issue that undermines the rule of law. And folks who are paying taxes, holding down jobs, and even having kids serving honorably in the military deserve a fair process. But if they're a threat, ICE has to act to prevent tragedies like the rapes and murders of innocent Americans we've seen too often from people who shouldn't be here in the first place. Kennedy's tone shifted seamlessly from light-hearted jabs to steely resolve as he countered the host's pushback, saying, "Hold on, now let's not get ahead of ourselves with talk of disappearing people. That's rhetoric. That's not only ridiculous, but downright dangerous, putting our brave ICE agents and their families at risk every day." And he backed it up by comparing it to how U.S. citizens get arrested daily by local police for breaking the law without anyone crying foul about vanishings. It's just enforcement targeted and necessary, the kind that's been standard for decades, until recent policies handcuffed the agency and let threats fester. He kept hammering home the point with that unyielding logic, noting that if you don't like how ICE operates, take it up with Congress, not the men and women on the front lines who know exactly who they're after and why, drawing on examples of how these operations have prevented further crimes, like pulling over on a public road to intercept a released felon before they strike again, and he wove in a touch of his famous wit, remarking, "It's like complaining about the fire department parking near your house while they're putting out a blaze next door, folks. They're there to help, not haunt." As the discussion heated up, Kennedy didn't back down an inch, fielding questions about whether someone striving to get their papers in order with a license and a steady job counts as a criminal in his book. And he responded thoughtfully yet firmly, admitting that from what little was described, they might not pose an immediate danger, but without the specifics, the intel, the background checks, the potential red flags, it's irresponsible to generalize. And that's why transparency in these matters is key, something he'd love to see more of to build trust, rather than tear it down with inflammatory language. He turned the tables masterfully, highlighting how in the past year alone, targeted enforcement has removed hundreds of public safety threats, with stats showing a high percentage of those arrested having serious criminal histories. And he urged the hosts to consider the real victims, the families shattered by violence from unchecked illegal immigration, rather than fixating on isolated incidents blown out of proportion, all while maintaining that composed demeanor that makes him such a formidable presence in any debate. Kennedy's performance was a masterclass in rhetoric, blending facts with folksy anecdotes, like recalling how in his home state law enforcement works hand in hand with federal agents to keep communities secure, and he didn't shy away from calling out the hypocrisy in criticizing ICE for doing their job while ignoring the broader failures in border security that let these situations arise in the first place. As the segment rolled on, he circled back to the church parking incident, dismissing it as a non-issue since the agents were on public property legally positioned for efficiency, not intimidation, and he painted a broader picture of ICE's role in safeguarding not just citizens, but the very fabric of a lawful society where rules apply to everyone to prevent chaos. His words resonated with a sense of urgency and fairness, stressing that while compassion for immigrants is important, it can't come at the expense of safety. And he wrapped up his initial volley by challenging the narrative head-on, saying that comments about disappearing people aren't just inaccurate, they're harmful, fueling threats against those who wear the badge and protect us all. And in that moment, it was clear Kennedy was owning the conversation, turning what could have been a gotcha interview into a platform for truth and accountability. The hosts tried to interject, probing deeper into the definition of a criminal alien, but Kennedy was relentless, reiterating that it's not about painting all undocumented folks with the same brush, but prioritizing those with violent records, like the ones recently collared in Boston, and he shared a hypothetical grounded in reality. Imagine a community where a known assailant is let loose, because enforcement is stymied by politics. That's the alternative, and it's unacceptable. He infused the exchange with his unique brand of humor, joking lightly about how some critics seem more afraid of a parked van than the actual predators it helps catch, which elicited a reluctant chuckle from the panel and lightened the mood without diluting his message. Kennedy's command of the facts was impeccable, pulling from reports on ICE's success rates in removing high-risk individuals, and he emphasized the human element, the agents who risk their lives daily, the spouses and kids who worry about retaliation from inflammatory rhetoric, and he made it personal without overstepping, noting that enforcement isn't about fear-mongering, but about fostering a secure environment where everyone, including law-abiding immigrants, can thrive. As the back and forth continued, he addressed the case of the bush-trimming father again, conceding that if the details show no criminal threat, then perhaps it's a matter for review, but he cautioned against using one anecdote to undermine the entire system, especially when data shows the vast majority of arrests target genuine dangers, and he called for more data transparency to quell doubts, positioning himself as a bridge builder rather than a divider. Kennedy's eloquence shone through as he navigated the tricky waters of policy and perception, always circling back to the core principle that laws exist for a reason, and enforcing them selectively only breeds more problems, drawing parallels to everyday justice without ever losing his thread. The segment felt like a turning point with Kennedy, not just defending ICE, but elevating the discourse, reminding viewers that real progress comes from facts, not fear, and his poised, persuasive style left no doubt that he was the one steering the ship in this stormy debate, completely owning the moment with grace and grit that only a seasoned statesman like him could muster. He didn't let the conversation devolve into shouting. Instead, he elevated it with reasoned arguments like explaining the investigative process behind each arrest, the background checks, the coordination with local law enforcement, the focus on final orders of removal. And he underscored that ICE isn't dragging people away willy-nilly, but conducting operations with precision to avoid collateral damage. Kennedy's passion for public safety was palpable as he recounted how unchecked threats have led to heartbreaking losses in communities across the country, and he urged a balanced view where compassion and security go hand in hand, not at odds. By the time the first break loomed, it was evident that Kennedy had not only held his ground, but had advanced it, turning skeptics into listeners with his blend of logic, empathy, and that inimitable wit that makes complex issues accessible. He wrapped his thoughts on the opening salvo by reaffirming that ICE agents are heroes, not villains, and any narrative to the contrary does a disservice to the nation they protect. Leaving the hosts grappling for responses as the camera panned out on a studio buzzing with the energy of a debate, well fought and masterfully won by the senator from Louisiana. And as the discussion paused for commercials, the impact of Kennedy's words lingered, a testament to how one voice grounded in truth can cut through the noise and reshape the conversation for the better, setting the stage for deeper insights into the challenges and triumphs of immigration enforcement in America today. But Kennedy wasn't done yet. He had more to say, building on his foundation with even more compelling points that would unfold in the hours ahead. But for now, in this opening clash, he had already proven why he's a force to be reckoned with on the national stage, destroying misconceptions with facts and finesse. The hosts circled back after the break, probing about community fear again. But Kennedy was ready, reiterating that parking legally isn't an operation, it's preparation, and blowing it up into something sinister only distracts from real issues like the criminals ICE is removing. He shared another layer, talking about how agents face daily threats from such rhetoric, their families too, and it's time to honor their service rather than vilify it. Kennedy's delivery was flawless, mixing solemnity with levity, like when he said, "If a parked car scares you more than a rapist on the loose, we've got our priorities mixed up," which landed perfectly, drawing nods even from skeptics. He delved into the nuances of cases, stressing that without full files, judgments are premature. But the pattern is clear. ICE targets threats, not taxpayers or military families, unless there's more to the story. His command of the topic was absolute, citing broad stats on arrest success, without getting bogged down, always tying back to safety for all. As the exchange flowed, Kennedy's confidence grew, countering every point with poise, making the case that real reform starts with Congress, not criticism of enforcers. The morning airwaves crackled with his energy, a reminder that truthful dialogue can bridge divides, and in this chapter of the showdown, Kennedy emerged as the undisputed champion of clarity and common sense. He pressed on, addressing the broader implications, how lax enforcement in recent years has emboldened dangers, but now, with focused operations, things are turning around, one arrest at a time. Kennedy's words painted a picture of hope through action, where law-abiding folks have nothing to fear, and threats are neutralized efficiently. His humor surfaced again, lightening a heavy topic without trivializing it, as he quipped about bureaucrats versus boots on the ground. The hosts pushed, but Kennedy parried, always respectful, yet resolute, embodying the best of public discourse. By mid-segment, the tide had turned, with Kennedy's logic shining bright, dispelling shadows of doubt, and affirming that enforcement is about protection, not persecution. And as the conversation evolved, his presence dominated, a beacon of reasoned advocacy in a sea of sound bites, completely destroying the Morning Joe narrative with unassailable truth and charm that captivated all who tuned in. He didn't stop at defense. He went on the offensive, highlighting successes like Boston's recent takedowns, crediting agents for their bravery amid adversity. Kennedy's narrative wove seamlessly from specific cases to big-picture principles, ensuring every listener grasped the stakes. His final thoughts in this opening barrage reinforced that unity comes from facts, not fiction, leaving an indelible mark on the show and its audience. The senator's performance was nothing short of brilliant, a tour de force that showcased why he's revered for cutting through clutter with wisdom and wit. In the end, this chapter set a high bar, with Kennedy at the helm, steering toward a safer, fairer America through honest conversation and steadfast commitment to the law. Shifting gears from the heated studio lights of Morning Joe to the gritty streets of Boston, where the chill of early morning fog mingled with the distant hum of city traffic and the faint scent of harbor salt in the air. Senator John Kennedy found himself embedded with a team of ICE agents on a routine patrol, his boots hitting the pavement as he rolled up his sleeves to get a first-hand look at the real work behind the headlines, diving deep into the operations that keep communities safe from hidden threats lurking in the shadows. Kennedy, ever the approachable lawmaker, with that easygoing Louisiana vibe, shook hands firmly with the lead agent, a veteran named Ramirez, who'd spent years on the front lines, and as they climbed into the unmarked van parked discreetly on a side street, not some shadowy alley but a public spot where anyone could see them. He listened intently as Ramirez laid out the day's mission, tracking down a known criminal alien with a rap sheet that included assault on a minor, the kind of case that didn't make it to TV debates, but hit hard in real neighborhoods where kids played outside and families tried to build lives without looking over their shoulders. The senator nodded thoughtfully, his sharp mind absorbing every detail as the team reviewed the intel folder pages filled with surveillance notes, witness statements, and cross-references from local PD that painted a clear picture of why this individual posed a public safety risk. Not just some paperwork violation, but a pattern of violence that had escalated over time, and Kennedy remarked with his characteristic dry wit, "Well, if we're out here playing hide-and-seek with folks like this, it's a game where the good guys need to win every single round." Lightening the mood in the van, where tension ran high from the constant scrutiny these agents faced from critics who never saw the late-night stakeouts or the split-second decisions that could save lives. As they cruised through the bustling districts, passing row houses and corner stores where immigrants and citizens alike went about their days. Kennedy asked probing questions not as a politician grandstanding, but as someone genuinely invested in understanding the boots-on-the-ground reality, like how they coordinated with state authorities to avoid stepping on toes while ensuring no dangerous offenders slipped through the net. And Ramirez shared stories of past ops, where they'd intercepted a fugitive just blocks from a school, preventing what could have been a tragedy, emphasizing that their focus was laser-sharp on threats like child predators or violent assailants, not the hard-working folks trimming hedges or flipping burgers at local spots. Kennedy's empathy shone through as he heard about the personal toll on these agents, the anonymous threats scrawled on their vehicles, the worry lines etched on their faces from knowing their families could be targeted by those who painted them as villains rather than protectors. And he leaned in closer, saying, "Y'all are the unsung heroes in this mess," putting it all on the line, while some folks back in Washington sip coffee and second-guess from afar his words carrying that blend of respect and resolve that made the team feel seen not just as badges, but as people with mortgages, kids in school, and a deep-seated commitment to the oath they swore. The conversation turned to a recent bust they'd pulled off, nabbing a guy who'd been dodging deportation after racking up charges for indecent assault on a teen, and Kennedy flipped through the case file himself, his eyes narrowing at the evidence photos and timelines that showed how ICE's persistence had finally cornered him in a quiet suburb, not through some dramatic raid, but a calculated stop based on tips and tech that tracked his movements without alarming the whole block. He countered the common myths head-on in his mind, recalling how back on the show they'd harped on that parked vehicle near a church, but out here it was crystal clear agents parked in public spaces for efficiency, waiting on alerts from detention centers about releases, not to spook worshippers, but to act fast when a high-risk release hit the streets like the time they idled near a community center, only to swoop in on a suspect moments later, averting potential harm to vulnerable folks nearby. Kennedy's visit wasn't just a photo op. He rolled with them to a briefing room later that afternoon, surrounded by maps pinned with red dots, marking hotspots for criminal activity tied to undocumented threats. And he engaged deeply, asking about training protocols that emphasized de-escalation and cultural sensitivity to minimize community impact, nodding approvingly as agents described how they avoided sensitive locations like schools or hospitals unless absolutely necessary, always prioritizing safety over spectacle. One agent, a young mom named Torres, opened up about the emotional weight of the job, recounting a case where they'd arrested a repeat offender who'd terrorized a pregnant woman in her own home, and Kennedy listened without interruption, his face reflecting genuine concern as he responded. "That's the heart of it right there. Y'all aren't just enforcing borders. You're shielding families from nightmares they shouldn't have to face, infusing the room with a sense of solidarity that boosted morale in a field where burnout loomed large from constant vilification." As the day wore on, they hit the field again this time, shadowing a surveillance op on a suspect linked to aggravated battery, and Kennedy observed from the van's tinted windows how the team operated with precision using drones and databases to confirm identities without causing a scene, turning what could be chaotic into something almost surgical. And he quipped lightly to ease the nerves. "It's like herding cats, but these cats have claws and records longer than a bayou alligator." Drawing chuckles that broke the intensity while underscoring the dangers they navigated daily. He delved into the tech side, too fascinated by the apps and algorithms that flagged patterns in criminal data, helping agents predict where threats might surface, and he praised their adaptability in a world where policies shifted like sand, always finding ways to protect, despite the handcuffs from higher-ups that sometimes limited their scope. Kennedy's presence humanized the abstract debates from TV as he shared lunch with the team at a local diner. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries amid the clatter of plates, where stories flowed freely about successes that never made the news, like reuniting a victim with justice after years of evasion, or quietly deporting a gang affiliate before he could recruit more trouble, and the senator absorbed it all, his notepad filling with insights to bring back to Capitol Hill, vowing to advocate for better resources so these folks could do their jobs without the added burden of unfair backlash. Toward evening, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, They wrapped up with a debrief on a case involving a child endangerment charge where ICE had collaborated seamlessly with child services to ensure the minor involved got the help needed while the perpetrator faced consequences. And Kennedy reflected aloud on how these layered efforts showed the agency's true colors not as fearmongers, but as guardians weaving a safety net for the most vulnerable, countering the narrative of indiscriminate sweeps with tales of targeted precision that saved lives quietly without fanfare. His empathy extended to the broader immigrant community too, acknowledging that most folks just wanted a shot at the American dream. And that's why focusing on the bad apples was crucial to protect everyone, including those building lives here legally or in process. And he stressed to the team how their work upheld that balance, earning nods of agreement around the table. As night fell and the city lights flickered on, Kennedy bid farewell with handshakes and words of gratitude, carrying away a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices these agents made, from missed family dinners to the psychological strain of high-stakes pursuits. And he knew this experience would fuel his future fights in the Senate, championing policies that empowered rather than eroded their mission. The real story out here wasn't about destruction or division, but about dedication in the face of adversity, with Kennedy emerging as a bridge between the halls of power and the streets where laws met lives, his visit leaving an indelible mark on the team who saw in him not just a supporter, but a true ally in the trenches. Back in his hotel that night, he jotted notes on how to amplify their voices, ensuring that the next time critics lobbed accusations, he'd have the unfiltered truth from the field to back him up, solidifying his role as a steadfast advocate for those who kept the peace amid the chaos. And as the agents geared up for another shift, they carried a renewed sense of purpose, knowing leaders like Kennedy had their backs, turning the abstract into action one patrol at a time. The day's lessons lingered, a testament to how understanding the ground game changed everything from policy tweaks to public perception, with Kennedy at the forefront, embodying the grit and grace needed to navigate America's complex immigration landscape. He recalled a quiet moment during the op when an agent pointed out a family park nearby, explaining how removing threats allowed kids to play freely. And Kennedy agreed wholeheartedly, seeing in that vignette the why behind the what, fueling his resolve to push for smarter, fairer enforcement that served all. This immersion wasn't scripted. It was raw and revealing, showcasing Kennedy's commitment to facts over fiction, empathy over expediency, and, in the end, it painted him as the people's senator, deeply connected to the realities that shaped his unyielding stance on safety and sovereignty. The streets of Boston had spoken, and through Kennedy's eyes, their message was clear. Real protection came from supporting those on the front lines, not sidelining them with unfounded fears. Winding back the clock from the bustling streets of Boston to the sun-drenched bayous of Louisiana years earlier, where the humid air hung heavy with the scent of magnolias and the distant croak of bullfrogs echoed through the twilight. Senator John Kennedy began his journey into the thorny world of immigration policy, not as a firebrand politician, but as a thoughtful public servant fresh off his time as state treasurer, poring over stacks of reports in his modest office that overlooked the winding Mississippi River, determined to cut through the noise with facts and figures rather than fiery speeches. Kennedy, with his unassuming demeanor and that quick wit that could disarm even the toughest crowd, dove headfirst into the data, flipping through government analyses on the economic and social impacts of unchecked borders, his brow furrowing as he highlighted passages about rising crime rates in communities strained by waves of undocumented arrivals, not out of prejudice, but from a deep-seated belief that good policy starts with hard truths, the kind that don't always fit neatly into sound bites, but demand attention if you're serious about protecting folks back home. He recalled those early days vividly in his mind, sitting at his desk late into the night with a lukewarm cup of coffee, cross-referencing stats from federal agencies that showed spikes in violent offenses linked to individuals who'd evaded deportation, and it hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just numbers on a page. These were real lives, upended families shattered in small towns where everyone knew each other, and he vowed right then to build his stance on solid ground, not shifting sands of popular opinion. One pivotal moment came during a town hall in a rural parish where Kennedy met a widow named Clara, her eyes still red from grief, as she recounted how her husband, a local mechanic beloved for fixing cars on credit for struggling neighbors, had been fatally assaulted in a robbery gone wrong by a repeat offender who'd crossed the border multiple times, despite prior arrests for similar crimes, slipping through the cracks of a system bogged down by bureaucracy and lax enforcement. Clara's story wasn't sensationalized in the national news, but it seared into Kennedy's conscience, her trembling voice describing the aftermath. The empty chair at dinner, the kids growing up without their dad. And as he listened, gripping the podium a little tighter, he felt a surge of resolve, whispering to himself, "Later that night, if we don't fix this, who's left to stand up for the Claras of the world?" Prompting him to reach out to experts in law enforcement and border security, scheduling calls with retired agents who'd seen it all, from midnight chases along the Rio Grande to courtroom battles over deportation orders, absorbing their insights like a sponge and weaving them into his evolving worldview that balanced compassion with accountability. Kennedy didn't shy away from the tough conversations, either facing pushback from colleagues across the aisle who accused him of being too hardline. But he stood firm in those heated committee rooms, his southern drawl steady as he countered with evidence from think tank studies showing how targeted enforcement reduced recidivism rates among criminal aliens, always emphasizing that this was about safeguarding communities, not scoring political points. And he'd quip with that trademark humor, "Folks, I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to make sure the bad apples don't spoil the whole orchard for everyone else trying to pick a fair living." His journey took him on fact-finding trips to border towns where he walked dusty paths alongside patrol officers under the relentless sun, hearing firsthand about the human smuggling rings that exploited vulnerable migrants while funneling dangerous elements into the heartland. And one evening around a campfire with a group of agents as stars twinkled overhead, Kennedy shared a laugh over burnt marshmallows before getting serious probing into the challenges of outdated tech and understaffed units that left gaps wide open for exploitation, solidifying his commitment to advocate for reforms that empowered those on the front lines without turning a blind eye to the humanitarian side. Back in Washington, he buried himself in legislative briefs, collaborating with bipartisan groups to draft bills aimed at streamlining deportation for violent offenders while providing clearer paths for those playing by the rules. His office walls lined with maps dotted by incident reports that mapped out the ripple effects of policy failures. And through it all, Kennedy's principles remained unshakable, rooted in a simple ethos: protect the innocent, hold the guilty accountable, and let data drive the decisions, not dogma. He faced his share of setbacks, like when a proposed amendment to bolster ICE funding got stalled in endless debates. But instead of bitterness, Kennedy doubled down, hosting roundtables with community leaders from immigrant-heavy districts who shared stories of how unchecked crime eroded trust and opportunity for all, reinforcing his belief that strong enforcement wasn't anti-immigrant, but pro-safety, a stance he honed through countless hours of reading victim impact statements that brought the abstract into sharp, heartbreaking focus. One such account involved a young mother in a Gulf Coast town whose daughter had been victimized in a hit-and-run by a driver with multiple DUIs who had been deported twice before, but kept returning, And as Kennedy met with her, offering a comforting hand on her shoulder, he internalized the pain, channeling it into speeches on the Senate floor, where he'd say, "We owe it to these families to do better, not with empty promises, but with real action that keeps threats at bay." His voice carrying the weight of those encounters without ever wavering. Through years of this grind, Kennedy emerged not as a rigid ideologue, but as a principled pragmatist. His journey a testament to how personal stories and empirical evidence could forge a path forward, inspiring him to mentor younger lawmakers on the importance of grounding rhetoric. In reality, always with a dash of that folksy wisdom like, "You can't fix a leaky boat by ignoring the holes. You've got to patch 'em up before everyone sinks." His evolution wasn't dramatic or overnight, but a steady build layer by layer from those quiet office nights to public forums where he'd field tough questions with grace, always circling back to the core truth that effective immigration policy uplifts everyone by prioritizing security and fairness. As he reflected on this path in quieter moments, perhaps staring out at the Capitol dome under a full moon, Kennedy knew his stance had been forged in the fires of real-world consequences, making him the unflinching advocate he was today, ready to take on any debate with the armor of facts and the heart of a true public servant, dedicated to the greater good. This formative chapter in his career wasn't about glory or headlines, but about quiet determination, the kind that turns empathy into action and doubt into decisiveness, shaping a leader who understood that protecting the nation meant listening to its most vulnerable voices first. And in the end, it was these experiences that armed him with the conviction to stand tall on platforms like Morning Joe, not just defending a position, but embodying a lifelong commitment to justice tempered with humanity. Back in the charged atmosphere of the Morning Joe studio, where the hum of cameras and the weight of a national audience hung in the air, Senator John Kennedy wrapped up his appearance with a commanding presence, his Louisiana drawl weaving together conviction and clarity as he left an indelible mark on the debate, not just defending ICE, but elevating the entire conversation to a level of truth and accountability that resonated far beyond the set. With the hosts still reeling from his razor-sharp rebuttals, Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady and his voice calm but firm, delivering a final salvo that crystallized his message. ICE agents aren't the villains in this story. They're the guardians, keeping our streets safe. And if we want a society where everyone can thrive, we've got to stop demonizing those enforcing the law and start grappling with the facts, like how targeted operations in places like Boston have taken down predators who'd otherwise prey on the vulnerable, leaving families free to live without fear. He didn't shy away from the emotional weight, acknowledging the complexity of cases like the father trimming bushes at IHOP, but insisted that without specifics, criminal records, deportation orders, or investigative details, it's reckless to paint every enforcement action as heartless, and he urged the audience to demand transparency to look at the data, showing most ICE arrests target serious offenders, not everyday workers striving for a better life. Kennedy's closing was a masterstroke, blending his folksy charm with a call to action, saying, "Folks, if we're serious about fairness, we don't throw mud at the folks cleaning up the mess. We roll up our sleeves and fix the system together, starting with the truth." His words landing like a gentle but unyielding challenge to viewers to think critically, not emotionally, about immigration policy. He left no room for misinterpretation, dismantling the disappearing people narrative as not just false, but harmful, putting brave agents and their families at risk, and instead painted a picture of a nation stronger when it upholds laws with precision and compassion. Using his trademark wit to lighten the mood with a quip, "If a parked ICE van scares you more than a felon on the loose, it's time to recalibrate your compass." The lesson was clear. Real progress comes from honest dialogue grounded in facts, not fear-driven sound bites. And Kennedy embodied this by encouraging Americans to engage in the debate as responsible citizens supporting policies that protect while pushing for reforms through Congress, not protests aimed at those just doing their jobs. As the segment closed, the studio buzzed with the impact of his words. The hosts nodding reluctantly, as Kennedy's logic and humanity shone through, leaving viewers with a powerful takeaway: a safe and just society demands we prioritize truth over rhetoric, ensuring laws serve everyone, citizens and immigrants alike, by keeping threats at bay without losing sight of fairness. His performance wasn't just a win in the debate, but a beacon for civic responsibility, teaching that we all have a role in shaping a nation where security and compassion coexist. And as the cameras faded to black, Kennedy's legacy as a principled leader stood taller, inspiring a generation to seek facts, support justice, and build a better America together.